So hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Native. I am John Kane, and it is Saturday, September 14th. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at our history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity, and we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us. And we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that you can catch our audio streaming live at www.letstalknative.com. And of course, you can find an awful lot more there. We've got photos, we've got videos, we've got audio, and we have links to the podcast. We stream the live video of the show on our Facebook group page via Facebook Live, and it is shared from there. Our shows are available as podcasts on your favorite podcast platform immediately after the show, and usually by the next night, we post the video up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you catch not only what we do here in studio, but our short form videos and the shows we do back in down in New York as well. All right, I've got to address. We're coming up on what has been traditionally known, and I hate to use the word traditional there, but as Columbus Day. And what happens with Columbus Day is they've turned it into a lot of hype, a lot of mistruth, a lot of outright lies, and they celebrate a mass murderer. Now, there's been a growing movement to change that day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And there have been towns and cities, states, all over the country that have changed that day to Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, we haven't had that kind of luck with Buffalo, but we did get the Buffalo School Board, the Board of Education, to address the issue. And what I want to talk about today is how they address the issue. It is gutless. It is pathetic in the way they addressed it. And it shows a level of incompetence that is kind of pretty indicative of why the Buffalo School District is ranked so low and why its performance is so bad. I mean, what I'm going to talk about is the resolution they passed. Now, the resolution is terrible on a bunch of different levels. Grammatically, it's terrible. They can't seem to get things like, they can't seem to conjugate a verb to know whether they're talking about in the present tense or the future tense. They've left words out, typographical errors, and this thing got distributed. So I want to talk about this resolution, and I guess I get right to it. When you pass a resolution, what you do is you start it by saying, who's doing it, the Board of Education, and then you format it with a bunch of whereases. You say whereas such and such, such and such, such and such, and you create a body of these kind of known truths that you're going to base a therefore afterwards. So you're going to say whereas, and in the case of what we got here with the Buffalo School Board. Now let me see. I'll pull it up here on my phone here. I've got a image of it here. Let me see. I guess I should have been ready for this. Let's see, where's the pictures here? Oh, there we go. All right. So this is. I guess I could read the whole thing, but. Again, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 whereases, and then you have a therefore. Now, I'm going to go right to the therefore, and then I'm going to back out into the where the whereases. And I know that's not the right way, but let me just read the therefore. Therefore, in order to honor our nation's indigenous roots, history, and contributions, be it resolved that the second Monday in October shall be observed by the district as Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. Wait a minute. That sentence didn't say anything about Italians. It said, in order to honor our nation's indigenous roots, history, and contributions. And then it just stuck on Italian Heritage Day. Oh, well, there must be something in the whereas that talks about the entire Italian people, right? No, there isn't. Now I'll go back because, again, the absurdity and you have to pardon the grammar because that's pretty pathetic too. So whereas the Buffalo Board of Education, the board, is committed to promote, not promoting, but to promote the well-being and growth of every student in the district. And whereas the board is committed to closing. Now, this time they got the ing right, so they got the right tense with the verb, to closing the equity gap through its policies and practices wherever it may exist. And whereas it is recognized that indigenous peoples and nations of the land that would later become known as the Americas have occupied these lands since time immemorial, and the board desires to recognize the substantial cultural contributions of indigenous peoples to the city of Buffalo and the state of New York and the United States. And whereas the board, is committed to combating prejudice, discrimination, and institutional racism wherever it may exist, and is further committed to promoting awareness and understanding and good relations between the indigenous peoples and nations and all other segments of our district. And then they go to therefore. Okay, so you did 4 whereases, and you never address why this date would be named also Italian Heritage Day. I mean, look, it's clearly, related to the fact that it has been known as Columbus Day, but they never reference that. And they never make any case for calling it. If you're going to put a therefore, you're going to call it Italian Heritage Day, you should explain why. All you did in the previous whereases is talk generally about racism. And look, Italians aren't experiencing racism. Italians aren't experiencing some equity gap. People of color are. Native people, black people are. So you think generally, but no. Then they talk about specifically indigenous people. They seem to ignore the fact that Buffalo is in the ancestral homelands of the Senecas. I mean, that would have been a good thing to throw in there, but they didn't. And then they go to the whereas, and here's the crazy part about it is, for one thing, there's a typographical error. It says, therefore, in order to on it should there's the to is missing. To honor our nation's indigenous roots, history, and contributions, be it resolved that the second Monday in October shall be observed by the district as Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. Now, you're not seeing this, or maybe, I don't know if you see that. I've got it posted, and I'll post it again with this show. The only words that are emboldened in the body of this resolution, not Indigenous Peoples Day, but Italian Heritage Day. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, if you're an English teacher, you've already got, one grammatical error, you've got a typo, and then some misuse of emboldening just Italian Heritage Day. And you've got a composition problem. You've made this resolution, this therefore, based on no facts behind it. This is the Board of Education. I mean, it's no wonder Buffalo schools, schools are so poor performing. So now, and it gets a little bit worse because, which shall be reflected in the school district electronic and printed calendars for the 2019 and the 2020 school year. Well, the printed calendars have been printed. You're making this resolution at the last week in August. Those calendars are already printed. You're not going to change the printed calendars. You're not going to go back and say, okay, we're going to change this day. We're not going to call it Columbus Day anymore. We're going to call it Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. And there's nothing in this resolution that suggests that it's going to go beyond the 2019-2020 school year. I mean, so it fails even there. I mean, it doesn't say that it will be for from here on known as Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. It just says for this school year. And then they do have a part at the end where they say, resolve that the superintendent is directed to develop a community contest involving students to inform the board about the appropriate naming of the second Monday in October. Well, I thought you just did that. You just named it Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. And the superintendent shall inform the board of its feedback during a work session during the course of the 2019-2020 school year. Well, if this is something you plan to do, it'll be over by the time this day actually occurs. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. One thing, and here's the thing. We know why this is being done this way. It's because they're afraid of Italian backlash. You know, Christopher Columbus was not an Italian hero. For one thing, Italia was a region. It wasn't a country in 1492. He didn't sail for the kingdom or the monarchy of Italy because it didn't exist. He didn't sail for Rome. He didn't sail for Genoa, where he was from. He sailed for Spain. And he didn't do this to advance and lay the foundation for Italian heritage on this continent. He did nothing for that. So the whole celebrating Columbus and Columbus Day is absurd anyway. I mean, it's just absurd anyway. But the fact that Italian Americans have turned Columbus into their patron saint and their hero, I'm sorry, that's on you that you made this mistake. That you've selected. I mean, there are a lot of people that have, Italian or Sicilian or, background, Leonardo da Vinci, there's Amerigo Vespucci. I mean, there's a lot of other people. The guy who actually sailed to North America, because that wasn't Columbus, they call him John Cabot, but it was Giovanni Caboto. He was Italian, certainly more Italian than Christopher Columbus was. There are many people that the Italians could have been drawn to, but no, they picked this guy. And they actually tie it to the Catholic Church, and they create this whole organization called the Knights of Columbus, which there was no such thing as Knights of Columbus, by the way. Columbus didn't have knights. Spain may have had knights. They called them conquistadors or conquistadors. They weren't, but Columbus didn't have knights. With a K, that is. I mean, the whole thing is absurd. So in an effort for the school board to avoid some backlash from the Italian community in Buffalo, and by the way, Buffalo already has like an Italian festival. So does Niagara Falls, Western New York, where they do, it's a food festival. It's a whole community-wide festival. They already have that. So they couldn't name this day Indigenous Peoples Day all by itself. They had to be gutless. I mean, I call it chicken shit, but that's really what it is. They had to be gutless. And in this whole resolution that is about naming it Indigenous Peoples Day, again, the only emboldened words in the whole thing are Italian Heritage Day. Now, what does any of the resolution, the body of the resolution have to do with Italian heritage? It doesn't have anything. The only reason they're calling it Italian Heritage Day is because Italians have been drawn to this Columbus Day, debacle, farce, lie. That's the only reason. And you know what? They could have been courageous enough to put it in the resolution. Say, well, whereas Columbus Day, has been revealed to be, all the BS that it really is, but and whereas the Italian Americans in Western New York have used that day traditionally over the last century, because it hasn't been for that long, but over the last century to celebrate their heritage. I mean, they could have put something in the body of the resolution that would have explained why they're calling it a co-holiday, Indigenous Peoples Day and Italian Heritage Day. I mean, they could have, but they didn't. And this is, again, it's pretty indicative of the shortcomings of the Buffalo schools in general, the Board of Education, the whole bit. Now, this is absurd. And again, it is. There are problems with the resolution. And I'm only looking at a document. I realize documents can have flaws. I mean, you can have typos, and you can have misspellings, and you can have grammatical mistakes. But the body of this freaking resolution doesn't say that for hereafter, the second Monday in October is going to be Indigenous Peoples Day / and Italian Heritage Day. It doesn't say that. It makes it sound like it's only being done for one year, and they're going to do a contest that's going to probably take place after the holiday, or whatever. And the whole thing is absurd. So my first comment is shame on you, school board. I mean, I don't know who there's names associated with this thing. I don't know who are the people that were that sponsored this thing. Jennifer. Oh, what a coincidence! She happens to be Italian. Macozy and Vice President of Executive Affairs and West District Representative Paulette Woods. Okay, so the sponsor was Jennifer Macozy, who obviously doesn't want to piss off her fellow Italians, or if she's Italian or just married an Italian, I don't know. But I mean, look, it's pretty gutless. It's shameful because as I share this, and I saw this shared on Facebook, as I share this thing, I'm getting all kinds of feedback that are saying, "Wow, that is pathetic. What the hell is up with that? What the hell's wrong with Buffalo?" Well, there's a lot that's wrong with Buffalo, and this is part of it. These are the people who are responsible for educating the children, the kids in Buffalo. I mean, and look, it'd be different if they could somehow boast that the Buffalo School District has some great numbers. They don't. I mean, they try to hang on every little thing that they can spin to be positive, but Buffalo schools spend an ungodly amount of money on a per student basis, something like $30,000 per student. I mean, that their school budget is extraordinary considering the failing schools and how much they're spending per child. Of course, look, most of the stuff is going into the superintendents, a lot of these administrators, not necessarily the teachers. I understand education is expensive, but you know what? You could send kids to an Ivy League school for the price that Buffalo is spending on a per student basis. And this is the nonsense that their Board of Education puts through. I mean, how poorly thought out was this? And again, I don't know if this is the sponsor's work or the clerk's work or the secretary's work, whoever wrote this thing, but it's terrible. If this were turned in as an assignment, it would fail. And I challenge an English teacher to take this, even in the Buffalo School District, to take this thing, look at it and say, all right, I'm going to grade this thing. And say, yes, you've got some grammatical errors. You've got a typo. You've got a composition problem. You've got a lack of clarity. You've got nothing that backs up this your resolution based on the facts that you tried to lay out. I mean, it's terrible on every single level. And again, it's tied to the gutless nature of not just politicians. And look, school board members. This is where they stick their toes in to get involved in politics. The first thing that, the lowest level of running for an office in a region is running for the school board. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's not an honorable thing to do. But some of these people have political aspirations. I mean, right, they had the last guy, one of the guys that got booted off the board was also ran for governor. Yeah, Carl, you know who we're talking about. I mean, look, I look at these things and it's almost embarrassing because they could have talked to somebody. They could have, the school board could have called in some native people. I mean, look, here's what I will say. When Lancaster was battling things like the mascot issue, the Lancaster School District in Western New York here, their school board and their superintendent actually invited native people in to have a conversation with them so they could have a little bit of, cultural sensitivity training, as it were. And they benefited from it. And ultimately the Lancaster School District changed its racist slur of a nickname to the Legends, and now they have a knight as a mascot, not a Knight of Columbus. They have a knight as a mascot, and they're called the Legends. But then the school board does something like this, and again, I'm going to assume what they mean in this thing is that it's going to be called Indigenous Peoples Day on every second Monday of October. That it's not just a one-time shot, but it sure isn't clear from this resolution. And I don't know what they're going to do with the Italian Heritage Day thing. I mean, it's printed in bold print on the resolution, but then they say they're going to have a contest to determine what they're going to call the holiday. Well, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, I saw somebody said something. Well, this is something about fry bread and spaghetti. What are you going to call it, fry bread spaghetti day or what? I mean, I don't know. What are you going to give it a one name that's going to encompass both cultures? Which again, there's no direct link between Italian heritage and native culture. I mean, obviously there are paths have crossed. And again, for even getting, not even talking about Columbus and the atrocities that guy committed against native people in the Caribbean. But even as you talk historically, I mean, the Catholic Church, which is was really dominant with Spain and obviously Rome. We had the doctrine of Christian discovery that came out of the Vatican. I mean, we could call that if we can call Christopher Columbus an Italian, I guess we can call some of these racist doctrines that came out of the Catholic Church Italian as well. I mean, it's the same stretch, right? We have to do better, folks. I mean, and we have to just be intelligent here. I mean, and the crazy part is, the indigenous people, are the ones who got called ignorant savages by Ben Franklin. Merciless Indian savages by Thomas Jefferson. Less than human. We are the ones who got institutionalized in residential schools because they thought we had learning disabilities. They thought we were mentally challenged, that we were inferior genetically, intellectually. So if I've got to tell you that your English ain't good, what does that say about you? I mean, you guys can do the research. You guys can read history. The internet is available to everybody, not just those of us who are looking for this information, from native territories. Try watching the film The Doctrine of Christian Discovery, The Doctrine of Discovery by Stephen Newcomb and Sheldon Wolfchild. Try watching that. Then maybe you'd have a little bit more understanding about why trying to share a holiday with Italian Heritage Day and Indigenous Peoples Day is inappropriate. I mean, it's just inappropriate. And it has no correlation. In fact, it has no correlation. That's why you left it out of the body of the resolution. You knew it was inappropriate. That's why you couldn't put anything in your resolution. There's not a single whereas that explains why the school district would designate the same day they're trying to designate as Indigenous Peoples Day as Italian Heritage Day. I mean, obviously you're trying to do some damage control because you're afraid of backlash. Well, there's no courage there. You're not doing anything bold. Of course, the only thing bold about this thing is the letters the font that you use for Italian Heritage Day. This is, I mean, look, this is where the problem exists. We can't have an intelligent conversation about this thing. Or as people, we can't have a dialogue. We can't have a national dialogue on the issue. No, we can't. We can't even have an intelligent conversation about this stuff. I mean, why? Emotion. That's in there on this resolution out of fear of reprisal for stripping the Italian Americans of Western New York of their Columbus Day. I mean, look, they do a parade and all that other crap, just like they do in New York City. I mean, it's absurd what they've done to transform this guy who committed murder, kidnapping. He brought. I mean, the first transatlantic slave ship was a ship that Columbus brought native people back to Spain on, including little girls that would be used for sex slaves. That's Christopher Columbus. He gave young girls to his sea captains because didn't have any money, so I'll pay them off in sex slaves. He chopped off the hands of people who would not produce for him. He disfigured them by cutting off their nose or their face. He murdered them. He fed babies to their attack dogs. He burnt them. He hung them. He crucified people, and then did it in some sort of twisted ritualistic religious thing. I mean, he literally crucified native people to emulate, Jesus Christ's crucifixion. He would hang and burn people 13 at a time to represent Jesus Christ and the 12 apostles. Why? Who the hell knows? But you know what? They're not going to teach that on Italian Heritage Day. And they're not going to teach it on Indigenous Peoples Day either. No, we're going to ignore the atrocities. And we're just make everybody feel good about the stuff. And then wonder, geez, why does racism still exist? Why is this, in your whereas about trying to close the equity gap? Why is there an equity gap? Maybe it's because you've taught history wrong for a couple hundred years. You try to rewrite it, lie about it. Look, I don't care if you put a holiday and you try to give us a holiday. And of course, you didn't really give us a holiday because it's funny because so therefore, in order to honor our nation's indigenous roots, so you're going to claim to have indigenous roots. What? Because we were here? So our existence is your roots? I mean, there's even like a ownership and appropriation thing going on here. It's really kind of twisted. All right, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll beat up on Columbus a little bit more when we come back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native.
I'm loving the water. Seems so calm to me. Loving the water, it comes so naturally. It's a gift from my mother, can't deny. The day we lose it is the day, that's the day we die. Sense is death. It should have never been. No more sense is death. Drinking water that's not clean. It should be right. All humanity to partly water. Greed. What have we done? Put poison in the heart. What have we done to our children's future? This madness has gotta stop. This madness has gotta stop. Son of blood, selling our souls to the very last drop.
right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Hey, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank the Buffalo Board of Education. No, just kidding. They're not really a sponsor. No, I want to thank Ross and Holly John at the RGE Family of Businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises, and I want to thank the folks at GRE for supporting the show as well. And look, I want to thank all of you who share the show, share the podcast, watch the show, listen to the show, offer your comments and your critiques. And look, I'm ready for the critiques. I find on the YouTube channel, you can comment on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. And there, a few people are bold enough to challenge me, call me out for, various things. And look, let's have the debate. I mean, look, I don't expect everybody to agree with everything that I say here. In fact, some people may not agree with anything that I say on this show. But it's about having the conversation. I mean, some of these things that I try to bring up, I try to approach it from a perspective that isn't already being shared. Look, you can go find talking heads all over television, all over the internet. You can find all kinds of stuff on there. If something strikes me, I'll share a meme that somebody else has produced. But a lot of what I try to put on Facebook and on Twitter and on the show here is stuff that you haven't heard already. Perhaps a little bit different way of looking at something. It's still a Native perspective. It's not the Native perspective, but it is still a Native perspective. And that's what we try to do here, because this is what that critical thinking thing that I'm talking about. I mean, we have to have some of these conversations. So, hey, Fall Festival is going on here in Seneca Nation territory. I want to give a shout out to those people who show up. I know last night the weather was kind of brutal, and a few people, including my friend Bob Delamonte and Tuscarora Woodworks, they had their tent destroyed. So. It's a beautiful day today. I mean, it's a beautiful night out there. It's a full-ish moon. I know yesterday was a full moon. It was the Friday the 13th full moon. But it's pretty beautiful out there right tonight. I mean, I'm driving in to do the show. It's those are the kind of natural images, the things that you can just take a moment and reflect on, again, power, beauty of creation. So I just wanted to, kind of put that out there. Look, we open up this show with Pappy John's band featuring Murray Porter singing Little White Lies. And it's a perfect song to talk about what our kids are learning in school, which gets back to the subject we're talking about here. Look, it's not up to the school to create holidays. The fact of the matter is they're just changing the name of an existing holiday day they give up. And the thing that's important about this one, it's the first holiday that the school kids enjoy. It's their first day off. I mean, they start school in September. I know some kids start early, so they may have Labor Day off, but most kids start right after Labor Day. And the first holiday that little kids are going to stay home from school on is what has been called Columbus Day. And of course, the lead up to that is filling their heads with lies. We call them little white lies. We can just call them white lies. They don't have to be little white lies, but they are white lies because they are geared towards promoting white heritage in the country. I mean, and I can appreciate how the Italian population in the United States, how they grabbed on to Columbus. I mean, Italians were persecuted when they first came here. They suffered some of the same, immigration bias that that they're now demonstrating towards people in the southern border, people who are browner than them. And Italian people were treated as if they were brown people because they were darker complected, and they were persecuted. And in Christopher Columbus, I mean, this was a name that was already, there were countries and cities, and the District of Columbia, the capital, the United Nations capital, is named after after Columbus in a roundabout way. They could gravitate and grab something in the dominant culture, sound familiar? In the dominant culture, however inappropriate it really was, because Columbus was not, this symbol of Italian heritage by any means. Again, sailed for Spain because most people thought Columbus was a nut, and justifiably so, because he was wrong. All right, just to back this thing up, people think their kids have been taught in school for years that Columbus proved the world was round. That's bullshit. That's not true. I mean, that's just a blatant lie. People knew that. There have been sailors sailing towards the horizon for for centuries, actually. So there was no. There were a few people who thought the Earth was flat, perhaps, even at that time. Look, we still got morons who think the Earth is flat today. So, yeah, there may be some people out there. And you know what? Christopher Columbus didn't solve the problem for the people who are still thinking or considered flat earthers. There were also people who say, "Oh, he was a brave explorer." No, he wasn't. He was a merchant. This was about money. He was searching. He went to England. He went to other countries trying to get the cash, so he could sail. And he was certain that if he could sail west, he could get to the east. He could get to the Orient. He could get to India. He could get to the West Indies. Or the East Indies, I'm sorry. He would get to the East Indies. And he would get there and make a bunch of money. He would find a shorter route for trade. That was the whole thing. And of course, he miscalculated the entire size of the Earth, almost by half, misjudged it by, an ocean and a half and a continent. I mean, he thought the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean were the same. I mean, that's what he thought. He didn't know that there was and look, he should have known, but he didn't know that that the Earth was that big. So he was wrong. And I'll tell you, not only was he wrong going into this thing, even he never realized, even at his death, that he had not reached the Indies. I mean, he still thought those Caribbean islands were somehow just outer islands. I mean, he never made it to the main continent of South America, North America. So, I mean, he was a bad sailor. He was a bad businessman. In fact, he tried like hell to make his voyage profitable, and at the expense of the native people that he came upon. One of the first things he noticed was how generous and how docile the people were, how peaceful they were. He made a comment that, look, these people are so generous and peaceful. We can enslave them all with about 50 men. And so that's what they did. They forced them to bring whatever value they could muster to bring is that Columbus could take back to Spain. He saw that there was nominal amounts of gold that they made jewelry out of. And he would sever the hands off of people who would not produce for him. I mean, it really is among the most horrendous things, in the history of mankind. In fact, the church officials, who on one hand praised Columbus, or really praised Ferdinand and King Isabella for expanding Christendom, the Christian dominion, as it were, by sending Columbus. I mean, because he did come upon lands that didn't have any Christians on them. That's where the whole doctrine of discovery came. And so the Vatican, the Pope at the time, praised the king and the queen for expanding Christendom. But it still wasn't that profitable. So Columbus did whatever he could. He enslaved thousands of the native people, killed what may have been millions of them, and basically destroyed the culture. Tried to subjugate them into not just Christianity, but under Spanish rule. And of course, that Spanish rule would continue and go out throughout South America, Central America, and much of North America. And that's what Columbus is famous for. He didn't bring Italian heritage to any place, not the Caribbean, not to South America, not to Central America, not to North America. He helped bring, Spanish heritage, and the ugliest form of Spanish heritage. But as I was saying, the church folks who actually traveled and made the trip and went to some of these colonies that Columbus had set up, they were mortified with what they saw. Even though the church advocated slavery and dispossession of land and property and everything else, the savagery, the heinous nature, the crimes against humanity that Columbus and his men were responsible for, church officials, Bartolome de las Casas, wrote of it, and just wrote about the unnecessary, bloodshed, the savagery, the inhumane treatment of a people. That's what Columbus was responsible for. Columbus actually went back to Spain in chains on one of the trips back because his own people his own crew turned on him. Now, this is not a guy who deserves parades. He doesn't deserve cities being named after him, or Canadian provinces or anything else. This is a guy who really, if you were to do some sort of post-mortem, some after the fact, trial on crimes against humanity, he would be found guilty with no questions asked. And how do we know all this stuff? We know it because not only did the church officials like Bartolome de las Casas and some of the bishops and and church folks write this stuff down, but Columbus wrote it down. His own men wrote some of this stuff down. They wrote about being given little girls to that they could beat into submission and turn them into performing women, as his crew members would call it. I mean, so this is what it's all about. Look, I'm showing a film, and I should do a screening. In fact, I'm probably going to work a screening out with Burning Books in Buffalo of Even the Rain. We're doing a screening of it in New York City at the end of this month on the 26th of September. That's a Thursday, and it is really an incredible film, and it's a film that kind of layers things. And I say that because it's not a documentary, but it's a film, and the plot of the film is a crew making a film about Columbus. I mean, the truth of Columbus, the atrocities. But at the same time, the film crew is mistreating the indigenous people and exploiting them and taking advantage of the indigenous people that are in the film. And while that is going on, there's also a battle over water. And in fact, water is life is one of the lines in the film. And of course, one of the lines in the film is even the rain, because they were trying to stop people from doing rainwater catchment. And we've heard of that before too. They were trying to take all the wells and put a pipeline through where people would be charged for water who frankly didn't have money for water, but certainly didn't have the resources. These are people who were paid dirt poor, including by this film crew. But it's a great film. It shows great character development, but it gives some truth, not only to the atrocities of Christopher Columbus, but the legacy of those atrocities, which bear out even as people are trying to tell the story. Even if people are trying to say, well, look, we want to tell the story of the atrocities, but we're going to be abusive and exploitive in the process. Why? Because of the embedded racism. Because of the equity gap that the Buffalo School Board thinks they're going to close by having this, cohabited holiday on the second Monday of October, at least this year. The reason for talking about Christopher Columbus is to change the narrative. Look, we're not. And look, I have a T-shirt that says "Get Over." I wore it in New York on my last show. If you didn't catch it, because that's what we're told. We're told to get over this stuff. Well, how do we get over it? You're still teaching that crap in school. You're still teaching this crap to little kids. That Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue, and giving this happy little narrative that most of it is not true. Discovered America? No. He came upon a couple of islands in the Caribbean. Never even made it to the main body of the continents, North or South America. Never made it there. And the legacy of Columbus, you could argue that America the Beautiful is the legacy of Columbus, and it is, but it's not. Columbus's legacy is slavery, racism, genocide, misogyny. I mean, all the things that we're still battling today. So when you say get over it, how do you get over something that continues? How do you get over the fact that Native women, 50%, by again, one of the estimates, 50% of all Native women will experience some sort of violence, including sexual violence. 1 out of every 2 women, Native women. It was a rape culture that Columbus brought to the Caribbean. And it still continues today. So don't tell me to get over it, because it ain't over. How do you get over something that continues? Native people are still suffering from the legacy of Columbus. The United States has built upon that legacy of Columbus. The abuse of Native people. The enslavement of Native people. Yeah, Native people were the first slaves in North America weren't necessarily the ones that came on those ships in 1619 that people want to talk about. Native people were already being enslaved. And they may not have been big on the slave trade, but they're already being enslaved. And by some estimates, Native people were still being enslaved in the 19th and the 20th century on the West Coast. I mean, maybe they weren't calling them slaves, but their lives were tantamount to slavery. Dave Shango, the archivist, the guy who heads up the museum down in Salamanca, Allegheny territory, I did an event with him, and he said, by his estimation, it wasn't until 1924 when slavery ended for Native people. I don't know if that's entirely true, and he's basing that 1924 on the Citizenship Act, where Native people were declared to be citizens, which is, again, another, subjugation of Native people. I'm not sure that those Native people who are being exploited on the West Coast, the moment they passed the Indian Citizenship Act, stopped being exploited. Look, slavery, even when it ended in the United States, would continue on many levels because of poverty, because of Jim Crow, because of the racism that still exists in the United States. That's just a matter of fact. We could argue that the poorer you are, the more enslaved you are, especially if you're the working poor. We could argue that some of those very immigrants that are persecuted, especially illegal immigrants as they are called, which I think is a bullshit term. They are working essentially for slave wages. And that's a real thing, by the way. I mean, when we say slave wages, Thomas Jefferson was an incredibly efficient slaveholder. He created his own little spreadsheets to determine how much food, or how little food, I should say, he could feed his slaves without diminishing their production. He knew how to create essentially a working business model for slaveholding. Oh, he was efficient at it. He even managed to, convert a few of them into sex slaves. He even produced, and when I say produced, I mean fathered some of his slaves. Yeah, by having children with a slave, he had sons that were slaves too. Now, he treated those slaves a little bit better. But it's a funny thing. Even if you love your slaves, you're still a racist because you have slaves. By definition. Racism doesn't mean that you have to hate the people that you think are beneath you. Racism is about power and hierarchy. It's about superiority. It's about controlling and having power over people beneath you that are only beneath you because of the color of their skin. So you can treat your slaves relatively well and still be a clear, unabashed racist because you have slaves. This is what's incredible to me is we still don't teach kids in school what racism means. There are millions of Americans, white people don't know don't know racism is. They might be the racists, but they don't know what racism is. They think racism is just merely this notion that that races don't get along, or that because somebody is determined a delineation of race, that if black people don't like white people, they're racist. No, that's not what racism means. You know how many times I get called a racist because I say something like the Washington football team's name is racist, and those who promote that and are enamored by it and love that or that name, whether it's your high school or your college or a pro team, that your advocacy for the use of a slur is racist. Now, does that mean the person is a racist? Well, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But I mean, some people think that no, there's nothing wrong with rooting for the Washington R words. That doesn't make me a racist. Look, if you're rooting for the team, it's one thing. But if you are in love with that name and you refuse to acknowledge that name is offensive to the people it's referring to, yeah, that's kind of racist. See, racism is about power, and it's about a controlling, a dominant culture being able to lay the groundwork, being able to call their football team a racial slur. See, somebody who doesn't have power can't do that. I mean, people who aren't empowered can't use offensive language amongst the people who say offensive language is wrong. And it's only a certain group of people who can determine what is right and wrong. Marginalized people can't. Black people couldn't convince white people that slavery was wrong. Slavery didn't get abolished till white people determined that it was wrong. Black people always knew it was wrong. Native people always knew it was wrong. The marginalized people don't get to determine what is legal and illegal. A dominant culture does. That is why they say racism is systemic. The system supports racism. Black people can't be racist. They can be racially biased. Native people can't be racist. Why? Because we don't control it. We don't control the population. We don't control the game. We don't control the system. Even if we have some aversion to white people, it's not because we think we're superior. We don't look at white people and say, they're genetically inferior to us. No. If we're told through most of our lives never trust a white man, that doesn't mean that we think we're racially superior. It means that we can't trust them. Now, if people earn their trust with me, then they earn their trust, regardless of their color or their race or their ethnicity or their diversity. But I do know that people who have power, and that pretty much is white people, abuse that power. That's why Native people today live in abject poverty in most of the Native communities. That's why Native people have the highest unemployment rate on their territories. Why? Because the system around them, nobody cares. The power brokers in the United States are okay with black people being on the bottom end of society, of the economic scale, and Native people be beneath that. White people are okay with the fact that there's a disproportionate number of Native people and black people in prison. They're okay with that there's a disproportionate number of Native people and black people who are killed by police. I mean, look, maybe they're not completely okay with it, but they're kind of okay with it because they don't do anything to change it. And they are the ones who control that. Look at Congress. Look at the Senate. It's pretty white. Look at the president's cabinet. It's pretty white. Look at the presidents. Yeah, pretty damn white. Even the one black guy was half white. So they only, out of 45 presidents, only one was half black. And you know what? he wasn't even black in the sense of a black person whose culture. I mean, his father was a Kenyan. He wasn't of the slave, trade, black people in the United States. Look, this isn't about measuring his blackness, but he didn't have the same. He didn't even have the same history that black Americans have. I mean, he had to still experience some of the racism, and his wife and his daughter still are going to have to. But you know what? They're doing pretty good. They're going to be just fine. But most black people, most Native people are still going to struggle. They're going to struggle in a society that is still has their system rigged by white people, that is still inherently racist. And the fact that we see, white supremacy and white nationalism percolating so strongly today. Why? Because white people are getting desperate. They're afraid of losing control. Look, it was a real shock to the system when Barack Obama got elected twice, and the right, the political right, they were alarmed that white people even voted for him. Because look, you can't get elected in the United States to any place for anything if you don't have white people. I mean, if you're black running for office, you still need white people to vote for you. If you're Native, Deborah Allen, Sharice David, Native people didn't get them elected. White people did. And all the ones who fail in their bid for running for office, they fail because they don't get the white vote. That's the system. That's racism. So, again, I've got to close by saying shame on you, Buffalo Board of Education. You failed in your attempt to do something that you thought was some bold, courageous move. It wasn't. It was gutless and it was shameful. We'll see what you do with it. I'm not optimistic. But there are those of us who are still going to fight against the celebration of Columbus Day. And I guess, in a way, that kind of got mitigated here. But the fact that you would turn it into Italian Heritage Day without any explanation on why, that's pretty gutless. All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening. You can check this show up and its podcast. If you count just the end of it and you want to catch it again, it will be on Facebook. It's live now, but it will be a was live show afterwards, and we'll put it up on our YouTube channel by tomorrow night. So check us out and share the show, share the website, share the podcast, and share the YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.